Thank you for tuning into the Hacking the Patriarchy podcast. I'm your fervent feminist host, Raven O'Neill, and I get the honors of sitting down with women experts from all walks of life to discuss the ideas, opportunities, and the strategies that women can take advantage of to get ahead in our patriarchal society. So, if one of your love languages is learning how to hack patriarchal systems and structures, I invite you to join us and help move the needle. Hi, listeners. Today I'm sitting down with Oz Merchant. Oz is a seasoned startup executive with over 18 years of experience in B2B SaaS. He's founded 6 startups and raised over $147 million in funding. As program director for Founder Institute Raleigh, Oz mentors entrepreneurs in SaaS and e-commerce, aiding in growth strategies, team building, and pitch development. Additionally, he runs monthly practice pitch nights in support of the Triangle, North Carolina startup community. Oz specializes in helping early-stage companies secure funding and scale their ventures through hands-on guidance and expertise in sales, success, and marketing. Let's come together and offer Oz our very warmest welcome. Thank you so much for joining me today, Oz.
Thank you, Raven. Appreciate you having me.
Yeah, I'm excited. Today, we are going to dive into the topic of global expansion. I'd love to start out by hearing some of your personal stories around companies you've worked with where you've taken them global.
Sure. So there's really been one company that we actually, and funny enough, tried to take it global twice. The first time, which is something to consider, is, are you really ready to take a business internationally? And the first time we tried it, it just was a little too early. We weren't ready for kind of the amount of kind of effort it was going to require, as well as the brand. The brand wasn't there yet to kind of make the penetration we're going to have in that particular market. So we went back at it about 3 years later, and then went for the global expansion, and we went into Europe. There's many different markets to consider going into. For us, Europe, for the product we're selling, which was a technology product, a SaaS product, it made a lot of sense because we were starting to get a lot of interest already in that particular region. We knew somebody there that could help get the market launched. So we basically relied on their expertise of the space and the local market to get the initial foot and traction in the door. And then as we started scaling that up, we actually split the company up into 2 different business units. And then I went over to run one of the business units. At that point, we were really just starting to grow into throughout all of Europe. At that point, we wanted to make sure we're doing events there. We're going to the different cities that we needed to be in, getting some face time with customers, and start building out the team, getting it more robust. So we started in Netherlands, and we added a remote person in UK as well. And from there, we kind of did that all the way till our exit, till our acquisition. So that became very much part of the kind of global international strategy. And then we actually opened up a Australian office as well. So that had only about 3 people, but I was managing both Europe and Asia through those 2 kind of offices, through Netherlands and through Australia. That was, it had its own set of challenges, moving into new territories, as well as me physically moving to Europe to do that. And I've lived in UK before. I've lived in France before. This was my first time living in the Netherlands. So UK is easy. I speak English. French, I'd taken many years in school. Dutch, I knew nothing about Dutch language or Dutch culture for that matter. So that was a huge learning curve. And all the stuff I'd done prior to was just kind of me on my own. This time I had a family with me. So my wife and my daughter came with me, and living with a family overseas comes with its own set of challenges, figuring out the logistics of school and just kind of everyday life that, things you don't think about it when you're single, but, you have to consider being married and living in a new country. That was it's an amazing experience as a business, as a career move, as well as from a family. My daughter in Netherlands is one of those countries where you have so many different modes of transportation. She would know how to stop at a tram stop, a bike stop, a train stop, a traffic light for cars. I think it's great exposure for her. So that was this whirlwind experience in Europe, and going through the process of learning new cultures, new language, and running a company and making that successful as well.
That actually brings up an excellent point to dive into why you might choose certain regions, certain places. Obviously, you chose Europe. How do you determine what that growth strategy is? Because there are so many different ways you can expand. You can franchise, you can IPO, you can take it global. So how might you choose what that growth point is and then where to do it?
Yeah, it's a great question because I think the first step is to figuring out what is that strategy serving. You've either tapped out your domestic market that if I can't put another dollar in the ROI I get for that dollar in the domestic market is not what I could potentially get for putting that dollar somewhere else. It's looking at, what's the benefit of that. And maybe that it's not a money factor. It's just, okay, I need to get ahead of potential competition. So even if we break even or run at a loss, it's counteracting the potential competition that may enter that market and get a foothold, taking a preemptive step. Because as you go into new markets, it's a very different type of market. They're going to have different price points for that market. So you really have to figure out, what's the overall strategy, why go into that market, and then if so, what's the best way to go about it? To your point, you bring up like franchising. Do you want to franchise into that? Do you bring on different partners that basically already have a foothold in that market and know the local customs and stuff? Do you leverage them? You need to think through why make that move to start with, and then, okay, what is the right first step? When we did, I think almost every time we've done it, we started with like a remote first approach, just to get some people in there that can be working from home. And this is, predates all COVID stuff. You still have people working remotely, but not nearly as much. And in Europe, there, at least depending on the country, at least the countries I was in, they like going into the office, or there's a culture that supports going into the office. So that was a shift to find people that will also align with the strategy of, okay, you can work remotely. So all that to say, think through what's your plan and is it the right plan for where you're at in the business? And maybe it's okay, we need to leverage more within the domestic market before we take that leap. And then if you are willing to take the leap, so where do you go first? We tend to always pick English-speaking countries first, just because it lowers the barrier to entry, and the learning curve around it. But it may not make sense for some companies. For others, it may be like, okay, Asia makes a lot more sense. If it is manufacturing, for example, then yeah, so Asia makes more sense. You certainly want to go into an Asian market where they have the manufacturing, the labor, the acumen, the resources to tap into. So it's figuring out, what's the right strategy based on where the business is.
That brings me to an excellent point. Since this is hacking the patriarchy, I kind of wonder if it's different for women, and if it is, what you might advise women on when thinking about taking this step.
Yeah, from a women's perspective, I would certainly say look at the countries and cultures which support or is where it's going to be easier for women to kind of enter into. Middle East, certain Southeast Asian countries maybe pose more of a challenge where you may need either a potential male counterpart to open certain doors. In fact, it depends on who it is, because it's not just a male-female thing. Sometimes it's also just a race thing too. White male counterpart can open a lot more doors than someone else. You want to factor in all those things as you're exploring that. The other piece is, what's the different cultures and customs, where the kind of the emerging markets. So, certain countries may be one way, but there's a new kind of youth class that's growing up, and they're maybe thinking about things differently. So you may be able to tap into some of those kind of groups, and depending on kind of what products and stuff you're selling or services you're selling, like can you leverage some of the new trends and emergence that's coming about, because it aligns with kind of what your business is. For example, if I have to go deal with a particular country's government and they're established, they've been doing things the way they've been doing it, it may pose a lot more of a challenge than to say I'm selling something that's trendy and it doesn't matter if it's LGBTQ plus or if it's women. It's going to be easier to kind of get the adoption and attraction there.
This brings up An excellent point. I know that we talked offline before this recording a fair amount about partnerships. And once any founder, but more specifically, diverse founders, have found the possible location based on the opportunity and the government, how might they start building those relationships to prepare themselves for entering the market? And also, let's say, having to move to those countries or open offices there, how might they navigate that in regards to networks, support systems, and partnerships?
Yeah, so some countries, it may be very easy to go in direct. In other places, you really aren't going to get any traction without a partnership. So when I was in Europe, when we started looking into the Spain and Italian markets, we're like, we're not going to get any traction with just trying to go in ourselves. So we found some partners there. I hear the same thing very much about Japan. It's very hard to do business in Japan unless you find kind of local partners. Certain South American countries, same way. You're not just going to get enough traction trying to come in from the outside. You need to have a partnership that's going to know the culture, know how certain things need to be processed. I mean, let's face it, certain countries, there's still a lot of greasing the hands to get work done. And if you don't know, who to be talking to, what right official needs to sign off on it, how to get that person's attention, some things could take 6 months versus it could be 6 days if you know they have the right contacts in place. So what you're tapping into not only that that partner skill set, but their network, their relations, their contacts and stuff. So you want to get in and leverage that. If you are trying to get something up and fast. I mean, if you have the time, you can say, well, we'll go through the channels that we're going to go through that coming from the States, and it may take a few months longer. But in business, you're always trying to figure out, competitive advantages, and the faster you can move, the better the growth can be. So oftentimes you're wanting to leverage those type of partners. And as far as kind of tapping into the networks, some are very open to looking. That's their whole business model. So they're out there at different events and stuff, saying we're a buying agency if you're looking to go into some Asian countries, or we're partners for this particular industry, if it's IT or some other more trade specific stuff. So there are places where you can find those because that is their business model. So they're going to make themselves available. Sitting back, from here, there is a lot of like expat groups and stuff that you can tap into. I'm sure there are at the business level as well. I know there's a lot of international Slack groups you can join, and you can start getting to know some people in those different markets, getting a sense of, how work is getting done, how easy it is. And as you start leveraging some of those networks and contacts, they can give you some guidance on what's the best course of action. I've been in a number of those just from a not business standpoint. When I was leaving Europe, one of the ideas was we were going to move to Spain potentially. So as I joined one of those groups, it was just understanding kind of issues people run into from a personal level. It's like, okay, I need to get an air condition. And I would see just how much communication was going back and forth just to get air conditioning. Like, how do you get somebody to come in, install it? The time it's taking, how many times they're getting rescheduled, the price issues. So you're getting to see that particular culture and the challenges that's going to come with it. For example, some cultures are, very much part of the culture is haggling, negotiating. Yeah, if you come in, if you don't understand that's the dynamic and that's part of the game to be played, it's hard to do business.
You answered several of the questions I had coming up in that one answer, but I'm trying to think about how I want to navigate my next question, which is around funding, because I imagine you can approach investors and other funding channels in the United States with the projection of that global expansion, but there might be that opportunity to get those partners involved and gain funding from the other side of the market where you're entering. But again, I'm making an assumption right now.
Yeah, and I think it depends on the countries you're working with. So there from a funding standpoint, from your own company, and inside the U.S. market, part of if you're getting funding, one of those cycles, especially like later stage rounds of funding, is just that I'm using those funds for global expansion. But if you're not going down that route, then there may be particular grant programs you can explore as well. Now, granted, there may be grant programs that are for specific countries for a specific purpose that may or may not align with your business strategy. So you want to identify, are there any that best align with what you're trying to achieve? Meaning that, there may be some policies and stuff in place that, okay, hey, we want you to do business with this particular South American country because we set up this type of trade agreement. So they're driving that type of commerce. So that may not fit your strategy at all, but if it does, great. Take it. Look for all those opportunities first, because that's potentially free money, and you're getting support, and you're potentially tapping into an existing network that can help make that move into that new market. So from the other side, once again, whenever you're coming into a new country, they're also thinking, okay, what's the advantage of somebody coming, foreign dollars coming into, or foreign companies, foreign personnel coming into our country. When I went into Netherlands, the process for me to get in there was as a knowledge worker, meaning that the entity there had to prove that the information I had wasn't available from the local talent. It's basically, once you can prove that, then you can bring in somebody from the outside. Otherwise, they just won't. You went under kind of this knowledge worker visa. So same thing. It's like when you're going to new markets, like, what's the advantage to that country? Are you bringing in new capital? Are you going to generate enough commerce there that you're going to generate a good tax revenue for them? Are you employing people in that country? So some of those countries may want that and incentivize that. And I'm not sure if Dubai is doing it anymore, but because they wanted American folks coming there, they would incentivize, they're going to pay all your taxes. So I mean, if you're getting $100,000 in salary and you're going to pay 30% taxes, they were going to cover that tax for you as well. So you're getting basically tax-free income. You're getting a housemaid, you're getting a driver, you're getting stipends and stuff. So they were doing all the stuff to incentivize those folks coming in. So you want to explore that country and that strategy aligns with you, or there are other benefits you can tap into that makes it more sensible to go in that particular market first. So meaning, like, if you're looking at, okay, do I go into Netherlands first or do I go to UK first? Well, if one of those is easier to get into and incentivizing it, then pick that one.
That sounds like a lot. So we've covered a lot, and it sounds like a lot of work. So my next question, are there consultants that would help you take that on?
There are people, I'm guessing for every country, they're kind of concierge service. You could try to go figure this out on your own. When I went there, I had to figure out how to get a rental property and understand the different areas where the schools are going to be. It's just like, dealing with a real estate agent here. You're dealing with that for a country that you don't know anything about. Understanding how to get a license. So those were all steps that you don't know and you can probably use internet stuff now to find it, but it just makes it easier if you can just say, let me have this one person that's going to tell me, have my little checklist of all the things I need to do and who to go to do that with, what offices to do that with and what time of day to do that, and if they can go and book those appointments. Because once again, if it's a different language, trying to talk to any government folks, they may or may not speak English. So if they can have it all done for you in that native language, you can just walk in, do what you need to do, and get out. So there are people like that, I'm sure, for every country, and that's kind of their sole focus is, there's partners too, kind of on the business side, but then there's these type of consultants that help that transition from one country to another.
Brilliant. And that is actually a perfect dovetail into my next point. But I'm going to lean into that also a little more before I move into my next point. In regards to your move for the business, when we're talking about huge companies that are going to move tons of employees, would it be recommended that each employee take on that themselves, or that the company as a whole hire a consultant that takes on the entire move?
As far as I know, so there's another company I knew that was moving or they had a headquarters in San Francisco, and they were opening up their UK office, and they were sending a couple of people there to live for at least a year, because I think they sent about 20 people over. So, and for some of those are 3 months, some are 6 months, because part of that, when you're opening up a new location is, there's this whole, you have a company, you have a culture, and you're wanting to make sure you have that consistency across your brand, your internal brand as well. So by sending those people over, you're helping maintain this kind of level of consistency. So when they went over, the company that was moving everybody over there, they had a team of people that were helping find everybody a place to live, where they're going to be near that particular office as they open it, helping with the office side as well. So there are some people are just independent people, then there are full companies that just help with that those type of big moves.
I'm loving this conversation, and this point I think is really important. So when we're talking about this kind of expansion, we're talking about employees possibly moving over. How do you maintain the ethos, the mission, the vision, the values? If you are the founder and you're staying in the state of origin, how do you manage having other employees in different places? They're executing on your vision. How do you manage that and maintain your mission, vision, values?
Yeah, I mean, as a founder, a couple of things. One is managing and regulating your own emotions through the process, which is a challenge for a lot of people. The other part is, having this grander vision and knowing that you are hiring the right people to go fulfill and execute on that vision. And then empowering them, delegating them to go, take on those steps and challenges and act on it. So there's a trust factor as well. So you're hiring them, but you need to trust them and get out of their way so they can go kind of execute. And it doesn't matter if you're going internationally for that, or if you're opening the office down the street. It's that kind of still holds true. Just because if you can't let go, and I've seen this a bunch of times where people will hire really good folks, but won't give them the space to do what you literally hired them for. That a lot of founders, because I do work with founders and coaching them, the company can only grow as far as the founder can personally evolve. And if that founder, that's why I like business. Business is it's a personal, professional, spiritual evolutionary process, meaning that the business can keep growing only to the degree that founder continues to grow and get out of their own way and expand their own box. Now, once it gets to a certain point where it's gotta, the business, I always think of it as like a child. It's growing up. At some point, it becomes this late teenager that's going to do its own thing. So whether you have control over it or not, it's its own entity, and there's a lot of factors now that are influencing that entity. So you don't have the same control. But until that point, to survive, to get to that point, requires you as that founder to be evolving through that journey, so that you can let it sprout its wings and grow on its own.
My next question is kind of a loaded one, but what advice might you have for women looking to enter these markets, build credibility when it might be a male-dominated industry, but also one of the countries that isn't as welcoming to women?
Yeah, I think when you're, as a woman, and maybe even as anybody, it comes back from a credibility standpoint to start building that stateside first or domestically first. If you can start becoming a thought leader and be perceived as someone that is adding value, you start building that credibility here, then you can find opportunities to go speak internationally as well. So it makes it easier for them to say, okay, well, you're out of the box of being just a female to being thought leader or a speaker, and something that's slightly a different box. And I think that makes it a lot easier to get acceptance into new markets. I've seen that work pretty well in both the Middle East and in Indian markets. So that would be definitely a starting point. Without that, I think it poses some challenges to get the credibility. Sometimes where your work can speak for you from the standpoint of I've seen people that can go get published and if you're a science background or something that will help lend itself as credibility to say, okay, you're coming in as somebody that has experience and you're leveraging that. Because I think the challenge in a lot of these countries is just a dismissal, right? They're just automatically perceiving women as either substandard or not as educated. So you're wanting to overcome that and have the credibility either through your work or through a kind of a platform where you're speaking so that you're counteracting those biases.
Excellent points and super supportive because it's not going to be an easy journey, even more so if you're a woman entering another world. Looking ahead to future trends, I looked at the research before this and it was like less than 10% of all companies with a global presence are less than 10% women-led. So looking ahead, what future trends do you see in global entrepreneurship for women? And how can women prepare to take advantage of any of these trends?
Yeah, it's a bit of a mixed bag. I feel like the world was moving in a particular direction, and I'm kind of uncertain as to what's happening in the world. I feel like we've taken a lot of steps back, and
Yeah, same. I feel the same way.
in some cases, it feels like it's just U.S. But then looking at kind of political and climate in other countries, it's like the whole world is mimicking some craziness. So I'd like to stay optimistic and say that I think in trend, at least in the U.S. market, I've seen the education level. I think women are surpassing men in the amount of education they're getting. I think there's a big influx into STEM programs, and I think as a founder, that's something you should probably encourage not only domestically but internationally as well, if you can, kind of as a way of kind of fueling some of that for potential hires. I mean, if you look at big companies, it's interesting how much of a long-term play they have. Like the fact they make Microsoft makes it, as well as Google, all their suites of products free for students is it's an investment 20 years down the road, because they know, okay, these people are going to get used to our products and our brand. They're going to choose us down the road. So it's the same way. And we used to do that too, where we used to, I'm trying to remember how exactly we did it, but we were working with some of the schools on projects to help their students in classes, because we knew that if they got used to our software and technology for their class projects and stuff, that at some point they're going to graduate, they're going to go work, because we're in the IT space, they're going to go into the work world and they're going to already have a level of familiarity with our products. So the same thing, I think, if women leaders, founders can invest in domestically and abroad into certain programs that can help bring more women into the workforce, and especially kind of STEM like programs, it benefits both that kind of local country as well as potentially their own company as they go into expansions. The other thing, when I look in the future, is again, we see that women already control majority of discretionary spending, and I don't see that slowing down. So they're voting with their dollars as to what they think is important. And I think that as companies scale, they already see this at a consumer level, that they're oftentimes a buyer, but I think you're going to see that get into the business world as well, that the majority of the buyers, or if not at least 50% of the buyers, are going to be also female. So how are you thinking about, what are your strategies, who's your sales staff to tailor in a way to talk to that kind of buyer persona that may be different than we've typically been working with? So I think that it just requires some change of how we are operating in a lot of companies. I think there's a movement in that direction, but I think it depends on industry to industry. And the SaaS world is still fairly male dominated, but I think that there's some awareness that's coming about. And I think there's potentially a whole lot more awareness that needs to come about. Like I said, I was very optimistic, a little less so.
Same. Thank you so much for all those insights. I love to end this show with your top 3 hacks regarding the topic. But before we do that, I feel like we covered a ton of stuff. So I just want to highlight some key points I picked up. And then you can let me know if I missed anything that you really want to drill home to our listeners. Initially heard one of the first things is really looking at your why for the decision on expanding into global markets. Your why, who you're going to serve, why you're serving, is there a need for it? Whether you said it or not, I feel like you should consult a consultant in how to do it, or at least looking at it at some point down the journey. I heard a lot about being really, really clear on the markets, because again, there are some countries that are not as liberal, as leaning and supporting women in business. You talked about grants, which I love. So if you're thinking about any kind of expansion, before you start looking at other things, look at what grants are available. I heard some points about really looking at government policies, the things in place for those places you're thinking of entering. So you really have a gauge for what your taxes are going to look like, what the policies are going to look like. Is there anything I missed that was super, super important that you want to circle back to and really drill home for our listeners?
No, that covers it. And maybe these 3 hacks will dive into some of that as well.
Awesome. Yes. Hit me with them. I love 3 hacks for diverse founders looking to expand into global markets.
So I'll start with funding. There is a huge movement I'm seeing for funding around diverse founders, diverse companies, diverse leadership that I think more founders need to kind of tap into. What's the group? I think I saw you post, right? The female founders. Is that what that's called?
Gosh, there's so many. I probably mentioned multiple.
I think I connect you, Sarah, there as well.
Oh, Rogue Women.
Rogue Women. Yeah. So there's a lot of these type of funds that are emerging to really support female founders, female entrepreneurs. And I think that it's amazing to see. And I think they just need more awareness. A lot of it is just the fact that most people don't know. So if you can tap into that resource for funds, because I mean, look, at the end of the day, most businesses go under because of they're undercapitalized. So having that can make a huge difference and staying not only in business, but then if you're like, okay, now I have the funds and means to go expand into other markets. So go tap into, as a first point, into whatever else is kind of available from a funding standpoint. So maybe separate from your traditional VCs and find those specific kind of funding sources. Second is around partnerships. When you're talking to, again, kind of going to international markets, I've seen a couple of these, and I'm hoping more and more of this will start to emerge as well, is there are partnerships that are female focused, meaning, finding a female partner that can get you into a particular country and help you with the nuances, not just from a official standpoint, but also things that women need to be more concerned about in a particular market. So finding those type of partnerships is going to be huge. Just as a case in point, not business related, but my sister-in-law, she's an amazing person, lived and traveled all over the world. She was coming to visit us in Netherlands, and she's like, I'm going to do a quick 10-day stopover in Jordan, just on her own. And she went to Jordan, basically found a female person that was going to be her guide and a driver as well. And the 3 of them spent 10 days through Jordan, and she felt very safe about it, got to experience the culture, went to Petra and did the camping, but all in a safe way. So there are resources out there to tap into that are female friendly as well. So when you're looking at partnerships, to explore and try to identify those. Maybe even use that to say, okay, maybe I'll pick this country over a different country because of the type of partnerships I can find. So that would be point number 2. Lastly would be just checking all the different assumptions you may have, meaning that every culture is so different. Things like if you are used to being very direct, well, certain cultures support that directness. If you go to Germany and stuff, they like being direct. If you go to Indonesia and stuff, they do not like directness at all. They prefer if your communication style is much more indirect. Same thing with how you talk about business, meaning that if you're used to just going in, we're in a business meeting, we're talking about business. Versus other cultures, the business is what comes last. You're going to have a personal connection first. If you're like in the Middle East or China, you're going to have that kind of rapport first, and then you'll get around to the business conversations. And even then, when you talk about the business, depending on what country you're in, in US, you may say, by doing this, it's just a little nuances you may allude to the partial benefit for taking advantage of an opportunity, which is going to be very different than if you're talking to like a Japanese culture where it's less of an I and more of a we. So it should be the benefits to the family rather than the individual. So all those little nuances are going to make a big difference into your acceptance into a new market, as well as ease of doing business in that, because you're picking up on those subtleties that's going to just make you more effective and feel like, okay, that we can do business with this person because they're respecting our culture. And language is another thing, so certain cultures prefer if you can speak some of their language, or at least make the attempt to. It goes a long way. So doing those types of things, just questioning kind of what are your own assumptions you may have. One of the other things that always you take for granted when you're living in the U.S. is you flip a switch and, there's always electricity, there's always power, there's always, well, for the most part, there's usually internet. But in other countries, those are all, you're taking those for granted. You may, come in one day to the office and there's no power, there's no internet. That's just kind of how that country operates. So if you can question any of the assumptions you have, you'll be far better served going into these new markets and be successful in them.
Thank you for that. It was funny. I was giggling a little bit. Back to your points, we had resources, especially financial resources, partnerships, and check your assumptions. And what I loved about the assumptions piece is I make a lot of assumptions on this show. And I always go back to, you're not supposed to make assumptions about things. But in entrepreneurship, you make a lot of assumptions. And the point is to make these assumptions and then test them. I'm excited to know that I should be making assumptions, because I do. I make way too many assumptions. I'm constantly thinking I shouldn't assume that. So one last time, the resources, partnerships, and check your assumptions. This has been so insightful. I cannot thank you enough for joining me on the show. For those tuning in who want to connect with you, how can they find you?
The best way is if you go to ozmerchant.me, that's the personal site, and that takes you from there to the different businesses, different stuff I'm working on. That's probably the easiest.
Perfect. I will put that in the show notes so people can look you up. I cannot thank you enough for joining me.
Raymond, thanks so much for having me. I really appreciate the opportunity and getting a chance to talk about something I don't get to talk about much. So appreciate it.
Great. Thank you so much.
You're most welcome.
Thank you so much for tuning in and listening to today's episode. For all the juicy deets on this episode, be sure to check out our show notes or give us a holler on Instagram at Hacking the Patriarchy Podcast. And if you enjoyed this episode and you'd like to help support this podcast, don't be shy. Please share it with your friends. Sharing is caring after all. Lastly, if you'd like to lend your personal support, please take a moment to tell the world about it with a review on your favorite streaming platform. We'd be forever grateful. Tune in again soon to enjoy a brand new episode of the Hacking the Patriarchy podcast. And until next time, keep on hacking, my friends. If you've made it this far, I have one more little thing to share with you. Did you know that this isn't my only feminist endeavor? That's right, there's more. I run a media startup dedicated to providing the most current and pertinent news about women, for women, and by women. Our mission centers on delivering a platform where the latest updates regarding women-led initiatives are extensively covered. highlighting women's actions, accomplishments, perspectives, and other elements that profoundly influence women's lives and contribute to meaningful progress. I invite you to head over to femled.news to learn more.